Could the days finally be numbered for Lord of the Rings Online, a storied MMO that has lasted almost 2 decades? That's a question that's going to be asked probably ad nauseum over the next couple years. Because on an announcement we got today that really shocked everyone, including myself, Lord of the Rings Online is getting a new MMO. And it's from Amazon. In a deal that was announced with Embracer Group to create a new MMORPG on the IP, this immediately spawned the question, can two MMOs from the same IP exist? Can they coexist and actually flourish? Well, there's some history here of that exact thing happening, and it might not bode too well.
But what if you could turn on your PC, connect to the internet, and completely immerse yourself in an
There is precedent of the older MMO using the IP just kind of fading away, or really abruptly ending. But will that happen to Lord of the Rings Online? Well, we've got more details for the new MMO beyond the announcement with an interview from the current CEO of Amazon Game Studios that explains a bit more about just how grandiose the scope they're looking at. The new Lord of the Rings MMO is in development by Amazon in partnership with Embracer Group through their Lord of the Rings IP holder, Middle-earth Enterprises. Does that sound familiar? No, this isn't deja vu, but you'd be forgiven for thinking so because in 2021, a Lord of the Rings MMO was canceled that was under development between Amazon Games and Middle-earth Enterprises. But there were some big changes between the canceled MMO in 2021 and this new announcement in 2023. Most notably is that Embracer Group purchased Middle-earth Enterprises from Saul Zaent's company, acquiring the IP rights to the Tolkien-related movies, video games, board games, merchandising, theme parks, and stage production. This alone shakes up potential deals, but there's more. Unlike the first attempt at a second Lord of the Rings MMO by Amazon, this will be done in-house after the failed collaboration with Leyou after it was purchased by Tencent, creating issues with the clause in the agreement with Middle-earth Enterprises. Oh, and John Smedley, who had a pretty big hand in the last major double MMO with one IP, that is Star Wars Galaxies and Star Wars The Old Republic, John Smedley is gone from Amazon, having left early this year. From the sound of it, he wasn't directly working on the old Amazon MMO, but there's an important link with Smedley we'll get to in a moment. The announcement from Amazon is pretty lengthy and has some, well, let's call it, with some charity, debatable claims. The as yet untitled Lord of the Rings game continues Amazon Games' growing momentum in game publishing and development, following the success of its internally developed MMO, New World, and action RPG Lost Ark from Smilegate RPG, both of which have topped Steam and Twitch charts and continue to nurture strong player communities. But one thing is for sure, Amazon is definitely positioning itself squarely into the crosshairs of MMOs, both as developer and publisher. This will mark their second MMO developed by them after New World, but by the time it launches, it will be at minimum the 5th MMO that they have under their name, with Lost Ark, Throne and Liberty, and Blue Protocol all under publishing deals with the company already. The details about the game are a bit more limited. We know it will be an MMO that will be set in Middle-earth, and it will draw from the literary world of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This sounds like the original idea of it being a prequel might have been completely scrapped. This puts it more squarely in competition with Lord of the Rings Online, which is also pulled from the same literary setting and perhaps same time frame. Though it's not like the different timelines and focus save Star Wars Galaxies from Star Wars The Old Republic. We got some additional information in an interview from IGN with Christopher Hartman, who became the CEO of Amazon Games in 2018. I want to point out some interesting tidbits from that interview that we might expect to see from this Lord of the Rings MMO, and how it may be different from the original game they were working on. This is a completely new game because the license is much wider. Obviously, there's nothing changing because we all know the world is set. The characters are set. It's really the freedom we have in terms of gameplay features, where now anything is possible, and the limitation is where it's technically possible or not. Before it was like, it's a good idea, but we can't do it because there's something else going on. Now the mission we're on, and the mission Embracer fully supports, Middle-earth Enterprises fully supports, is to make the biggest MMO out there based on Lord of the Rings. That's our ambition. It sounds like the ambitions of this game have increased from its last iteration. They're planning to go big, very big. But the cloud of New World hangs over the studio, the last MMO they developed that is still mired in the cliff it fell off from launch to its current numbers, that have stabilized but still seem relatively low for what they put out. This was addressed as he talked about what they learned from New World, which was actually pretty forthcoming. He stated the studio learned a lot from the New World experience, that you cannot just prepare for launch, you need to literally prepare for 2 years after, stating that New World's developers weren't prepared for the game's sudden surge in popularity at launch. That's not exactly surprising to hear, but it is good to hear that they're willing to admit that. Yeah, quick side note here, yeah, this is gonna be both on PC and console, as he was very clear about the shift towards including console, saying that Amazon Games' next wave of releases will be releasing on console as well. Stated plainly, we're going into the console market. The MMO they're building is one they want to have mass appeal. As Hartman put it, for me, getting a license should be the icing on the cake. The game by itself needs to be so good that everyone wants to play it. My target is not just to make a certain group of MMO players happy with the game. I want people who normally would not play an MMO saying, hey, maybe give it a try because I understand the content. It's Lord of the Rings. Never played an MMO. I definitely think we got to approach this from a much wider perspective than just being another MMO title. I want to make it very mass market competitive. But what about Lord of the Rings Online? What about the game that this could potentially be replacing? Well, a lot of the fear around a potential Lord of the Rings Online closure is likely going to spawn from a single comment from John Smedley, who was previously involved with the high-profile closure of another massive IP MMO in the wake of new competitor, Star Wars Galaxies. At the SOE fanfare in 2011, John Smedley was quoted saying, "It was time to turn it off. We had a contractual relationship that's ending in 2012. The Old Republic launching, a bunch of other business things with LucasArts." Star Wars Galaxies was successful for its time, but like many pre-2004 MMORPGs, was completely overshadowed by the incredible success of World of Warcraft. It was also in a state of decline in the years following its launch, with issues ranging from the lack of endgame content to a complete overhaul with the NGE that wowified the game post World of Warcraft. Originally launching in 2003, it would close on December 15th, 2011 for good, right before the launch of EA's Star Wars The Old Republic, only 5 days later on December 20th. Lord of the Rings Online, on the other hand, has been seeing some recent success, but it still remains firmly in a second tier of MMOs, and its age is showing. This is compounded by comments from Standing Stone that seem to be lowering expectations for the expected remaster, which has no current ETA. The remaster may become key to Lord of the Rings Online's continued success and viability, even more so than it had been previously with this announcement. I imagine there will be more pressure at the very least to revitalize the game. And for f***'s sake, at least get rid of the lag. Lord of the Rings Online feels like it's in a better position than Star Wars Galaxies was. But the MMO space is still relatively small, with players already fragmented. MMOs that are too similar have a history of cannibalizing each other. Look no further than EverQuest, EverQuest 2, and World of Warcraft. But there is some light at the end of the tunnel. There's hope for Lord of the Rings Online players. EG7, the group that owns Lord of the Rings Online, EverQuest, DCUO, and other properties, has focused heavily on Lord of the Rings Online in their investment documents. It's one of only a few that routinely shows up in those reports. In fact, that's how we learned about their player numbers, its growth, and the remaster before it was officially announced by Standing Stone Games. It is clearly a focus for EG7 to improve and grow Lord of the Rings Online. As for Standing Stone Games and their stance, We haven't heard anything official yet, but back in 2018, their response to the new game was pretty muted. Very much we're not worried, we're just going to continue what we're doing. This is perhaps due to something they've already said with licensing back in 2016. As stated in the FAQ, the license has been renewed. Since this license is no different from every other IP license, and since it's a standard piece of behind the scenes business, it is not something we are going to provide further specifics on. Suffice it to say, the license will continue to be a non-issue for the rest of the game's life, and we expect to continue developing Lord of the Rings Online for many, many years to come with your support. I am not too familiar with licensing laws and how that could be impacted by changes in ownership of the IP over the years, but this does feel like a pretty strong statement that Lord of the Rings Online may have a hardy license agreement with the IP, though there must have been some carve out for another MMO given that Amazon announced their MMO just a few years later, only of course to cancel it. If Lord of the Rings Online isn't worried about the license, well then we don't have to worry about the same potential reason why Star Wars Galaxies closed. And we'd have to resort back to, can two games exist? And we don't have any data on that, because Star Wars Galaxies closed 5 days before Star Wars The Old Republic did. But at the very least, Lord of the Rings Online still has many years ahead of it, because with this announcement it was stated that this is still very early in the development, and MMOs take a very, very long time to develop. Even with as much money as Amazon has, it's gonna take time. Oh yeah, and did I mention that John Smedley is no longer with Amazon Games? No offense to John Smedley, but as a fan of Star Wars Galaxies, Vanguard Saga of Heroes, and EverQuest, some of the decisions that were made under his tenure at SOE, they still sit with me. They make me uncomfortable, I'll just put it that way. And I feel a bit more comfortable knowing that he may not be overseeing this. This does answer one question with finality though. And it's a question that was raised when Embracer Group was mentioning how they had a bunch of games for Lord of the Rings in development. This fills out yet another one of those that we weren't sure what it might be. And I covered those games here in this video, so if you're a fan of Middle-earth and you want to see what else might be coming from Embracer Group since they have made this wide-ranging purchase, we'll take a look over there. It also kind of explains a little bit more about Embracer Group and what we could expect. My name is Red Flynn, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.